Native Warriors vs. U.S. Army Scott Massacre 1817. Kill him slowly. The command cuts through the morning mist like a knife. Lieutenant Scott rides in agony as native warriors drive burning fatwood stakes into his flesh, his screams echoing across the blood-stained waters of the Apalachicola. Just hours earlier, he had stood proudly at the helm of his vessel, confident in the strength of American arms. Now he becomes a grim testimony to the savage price of underestimating an enemy driven to desperation. Welcome to Native Legends and History Stories, where we uncover the untold stories of America's past. Join our community of history enthusiasts by subscribing, liking, and sharing this powerful story of survival, betrayal, and the brutal clash of civilizations. The date is November 30th, 1817. The crisp Georgia air bites at the faces of 26 soldiers, 7 wives and their children, as they navigate their heavily laden vessel through the treacherous waters where the Apalachicola and Flint rivers meet. The morning sun casts long shadows across the deck, where supplies meant for Fort Scott lay stacked like funeral pyres. Lieutenant Scott stands at the helm, his mind still echoing with the warnings he'd received just days before at Spanish Bluff. The Indians are assembling at the junction of the rivers, the traders had told him, their voices heavy with urgency. They intend to make a stand against vessels coming up the river. But Scott, driven by duty, or perhaps fatal pride, had dismissed their counsel. Now as his vessel cuts through the mist-shrouded waters, the true weight of that decision begins to materialize like specters along the riverbank. They appear first as shadows, then as warriors, their bodies adorned with war paint. That transforms them into living embodiments of vengeance. Hundreds of them line the shores, representing a coalition of proud nations: Seminole, Uchi, and African Maroon warriors, all united under the command of Homo Slamico, the fearsome Red Stick chief from Alabama. Each warrior carries not just weapons, but generations of grievances against the encroaching American empire. The tension in the air is palpable as Scott's vessel draws closer to the ambush point. Half his men lie incapacitated by fever, their weapons untouched beside them. The wives huddle close to their children, perhaps sensing the gathering storm. The river itself seems to conspire against them, its current pushing them inexorably toward the eastern bank, where death awaits in the thick cane brakes. But this impending massacre is more than just another bloody chapter in the frontier wars. It is the culmination of a chain of events that began at Foul Town, where American forces, under Lieutenant Colonel Matthew R. Buckle, had sought to wrest the Seminole leader, Nemefula. The Fat Warrior, as his name translated, had proved his reputation for exceptional bravery when American forces first attacked his village, resulting in casualties including an innocent woman. That attack had forced his people to retreat into the swamps, a tactical decision that would become synonymous with Native resistance throughout the Seminole Wars. The tension, simmering since the Patriot War of East Florida, where President Madison's expansionist ambitions had clashed with Spanish sovereignty, now reached a boiling point. The Creek War had already seen future President Andrew Jackson locked in fierce combat with the Red Stick people over territories in the Deep South. The natives' involvement in the War of 1812 between the United States and Britain had further complicated the already tangled web of alliances and enmities. As Scott's vessel drifts closer to the ambush point, the warriors take aim with practiced precision. Their fingers tighten on triggers, their muscles tense with the accumulated rage of years of broken treaties and stolen lands. The morning silence is about to shatter in a hail of musket fire that will mark not just a massacre, but a turning point in the relationship between the United States and the native nations of the South. The events of November 23rd would transform a territorial dispute into a desperate struggle for survival. American forces returned to Foul Town, finding the village deserted in the gray dawn. As they moved through the abandoned dwellings, they discovered what the natives had been forced to leave behind: massive stockpiles of corn, golden kernels that represented life itself through the harsh winter months ahead. Without hesitation, they began loading the precious cargo into their wagons, each bushel stolen, marking another family condemned to hunger. Word of the plunder reached Nemethla. Like a thunderbolt, the Seminole leader understood the devastating implications immediately. Without these reserves, his people faced a winter of slow starvation. Death by bullets suddenly seemed preferable to watching their children waste away. Despite knowing they were outnumbered and outgunned, Nemethla rallied his warriors for a desperate counterattack. The ensuing battle was fierce but brief. Native warriors fell under American gunfire, their blood soaking into the earth they had fought so hard to defend. Yet even in defeat, their actions sent a clear message. They would not quietly fade away into the swamps. The Foxtown incidents ignited a powder keg of native anger. Throughout the Southern Territories, warriors of the Creek and Red Stick Nation received news of the American aggression with cold fury. What had been isolated skirmishes now threatened to explode into full-scale war. Hundreds of warriors began converging on the Apalachicola River, their movements coordinated with deadly purpose to choke off the American supply line to Fort Scott. In this volatile atmosphere, Major Peter Muhlenberg found himself commanding a precarious supply operation. Upriver, the Major's request to General Gaines for additional support had gone unanswered, leaving him to manage with severely limited resources. When Lieutenant Scott's vessel joined his flotilla, Muhlenberg faced a critical decision. Perhaps due to his ignorance of the Foultown conflict, he made a choice that would prove catastrophic, splitting Scott's already minimal force of 40 men in half, replacing capable soldiers with 6 unarmed men, 7 soldiers' wives and 4 children. The vessel, now loaded heavy with regimental supplies, became as vulnerable as a wounded deer in wolf territory. Scott carried sealed orders for Fort Scott, including an urgent plea for reinforcements, documents that would never reach their destination. His journey began smoothly enough, but as they progressed upriver, an unsettling pattern emerged. Native warriors appeared with increasing frequency along the river banks, their silent observation carrying an air of deadly purpose. Still unaware of the powder keg he was sailing into, Scott pressed on until reaching Spanish Bluff. Here, at a small trading post, where weather-beaten wooden homes clung to the riverbank, Scott finally learned the terrible truth. The traders, men who had lived among the native peoples for decades, painted a chilling picture. They described hundreds of Seminole, Maroon, and Red Stick warriors converging on the river, all answering Nemethla's call for vengeance. These weren't just random raiding parties. This was a coordinated army, positioning themselves for a decisive strike. The traders, their voices urgent with concern, born of deep experience, pleaded with Scott to halt his journey. Wait for reinforcements, they warned, their words heavy with prophetic dread. The river has become a death trap. They knew the patterns of native warfare, understood the deadly significance of so many warriors gathering in one place. Their message was clear. Any boat attempting to navigate the Apalachicola would face certain attack. Scott, shaken by these revelations, took the time to pen a letter to General Gaines. His words betrayed a growing understanding of his precarious position. Mr. Hamley informs me that the Indians are assembling at the junction of the rivers, where they intend to make a stand against those vessels coming up the river. Should this be the case, I am not able to make a stand against them. My command does not exceed 40 men, one half of which is sick and without arms. Those words, written with growing apprehension, would prove to be his final report. Despite the trader's dire warnings, despite his own admission of vulnerability, Scott made the fateful decision to continue his mission. Perhaps it was military duty, perhaps pride, or perhaps a fatal underestimation of the native forces that drove him forward, whatever the reason. As his heavily laden vessel pushed away from Spanish Bluff, Scott was sailing into the jaws of a trap that had been weeks in the making. Lieutenant Scott's decision to press forward would haunt the annals of military history. His letter to General Gaines lay in a courier's saddlebag, still 2 days from delivery, far too late to save the doomed expedition. Whether driven by blind duty or misplaced optimism and swift reinforcements, Scott had sealed his fate and that of his passengers with 4 simple words: I leave this immediately. General Gaines, upon later receiving Scott's final correspondence, would wrestle with the lieutenant's inexplicable decision. He had been warned of the danger which awaited him. Gaines wrote his words heavy with hindsight's burden. I must therefore conclude that he felt it his duty to proceed. The question of whether Major Muhlenberg had issued direct orders compelling this fatal choice would remain forever unanswered. The vessel that carried Scott's party up the Apalachicola was hardly fit for the perilous journey ahead. A simple transport craft with long wooden oars, it offered no protection from either element or enemies. The boat's deck lay open to the sky, exposing its 50 passengers to whatever fate awaited them. Their only defense consisted of 20 muskets, carried by the able-bodied soldiers, a pitiful arsenal against the gathering storm. As they pushed upstream from Spanish Bluff, the river itself seemed to conspire against them. The high waters of late autumn fought their every stroke, each mile gained coming at the cost of exhausting labor. The tension aboard the vessel was palpable. Soldiers already weakened by fever strained at the oars. Wives huddled close to their children, their eyes scanning the increasingly hostile shoreline. The survivors would later describe to General Gaines the terrifying progression of their journey. Native warriors appeared with growing frequency along the river banks, their numbers swelling with each passing mile. What began as occasional sightings evolved into an constant presence, dozens then hundreds, of painted figures tracking their progress. The final count would exceed 500 warriors, though by then such numbers would be meaningless to the dead. Dawn broke on November 30th, 1817, casting long shadows across waters that would soon run red as Scott's vessel approached the confluence of the Flint and Chattahoochee rivers. The atmosphere grew thick with foreboding. Half the soldiers lay shivering with fever, their weapons propped uselessly beside them. The bitter November wind cut through clothing and resolve alike, but it wasn't the cold that set teeth chattering. It was the sight of Seminole, Apache, and African maroon warriors materializing along the shoreline like specters of death. 2 miles from the river's confluence, Scott's boat rounded a treacherous bend. The winter-swollen waters surged with unusual force, the current grabbing at their vessel like a giant hand. As they approached the widest part of the bend, where the river's fury showed in frothing waves, the current seized them with irresistible power. Every pull of the oars proved futile, as the boat was inexorably pushed toward the eastern bank, toward the very stretch of shore where hundreds of warriors lay in wait. Nature and enemy had synchronized their trap perfectly. The river's betrayal would deliver Scott's helpless vessel directly into the killing zone, where 500 warriors crouched in the dense cane brakes, weapons primed. The passengers' fate was now sealed, as surely as if they had been chained to the shore. Within moments, the still morning air would erupt with musket fire, transforming this bend in the Apalachicola into the bloodiest battleground of the First Seminole War. The trap closed with lethal precision. As Scotsmen battled the treacherous current, hundreds of warriors lay perfectly still in the dense undergrowth, their bodies pressed against the damp earth. War paint streaked their faces, a terrifying mix of tribe markings that represented the diverse coalition assembled for this deadly purpose. Homo Slamico, the feared Red Stick chief from Alabama, had gathered warriors from every corner of the territory, former residents of Foultown, speakers of English, Spanish, French, and Muskogee, all united in their thirst for vengeance. Though Lamico commanded the operation, each war party maintained its independence. Positioning themselves strategically along the eastern bank, they outnumbered Scott's fighting force by more than 25 to 1, creating an inescapable wall of death that stretched along the river bank. The warriors watched with cold patience as the current did its work, drawing their prey inexorably closer. The first volley erupted without warning. Hundreds of muskets thundered in near-perfect unison, their deadly fire cutting through the morning mist. Lieutenant Scott and his best fighters fell in that opening salvo, their bodies crumbling before they could even reach for their weapons. The air filled with an otherworldly chorus, the triumphant war cries of the native coalition mixing with the terrified screams of women and children and the agonized moans of the wounded. Gray, a soldier who would live to tell the tale, felt the searing pain of a bullet even as he watched his comrades fall around him. From his position on the blood-slicked deck, he witnessed the complete devastation of Scott's command. Later, around a Fort Scott campfire, he would recount the horror to Major Thomas Woodward. The Indians fired upon them, killing and wounding most of those on board. At the first fire, those not disabled made the best fight they could, but all on board were killed, except Mrs. Stewart and 2 soldiers. The vessel, now out of control, drifted into the shallows of the eastern bank, directly into the heart of the ambush. Warriors swarmed toward the grounded boat, like predators converging on wounded prey. Elizabeth Stewart, wife of a 1st Brigade soldier, who thankfully wasn't aboard, would be one of only 11 civilians to survive the massacre. Around her, the dying and dead lay scattered across the deck, their blood mixing with the river water that sloshed between the planks. In this moment of absolute defeat, one man refused to surrender. Without a final act of defiance, Sergeant Frederick McIntosh of the 7th Infantry, seeing all hope lost, made his way to the lieutenant's cabin.